unsealed. Judge Cannon now authorizing some new documents to be revealed to the public in the Trump Mar-a-Lago case. Of course, Judge Aileen Cannon is the judge who's presiding over the special master, and the special master, Raymond Dearie, has been the subject of all sorts of appeals. And so we've got a lot to unpack here. But there was a big document that came out. It was a sealed document that was updating the court on the status of the DOJ's investigation. Remember, they left Trump's residence there in Mar-a-Lago, and they came out with all sorts of boxes and materials, and they were putting stuff over here, and who knows what they came out with. But there was a big question about the privilege and whether the FBI agents who were rummaging through this stuff were going to be rummaging through attorney-client privilege material, or let's say executive privilege material, stuff that's private that they shouldn't see. And what the court has done is it said, okay, we're going to have two teams go in and take a look at this stuff. The investigation team and the privilege team. There's a separate team that's going to be going and segmenting out the problematic materials and giving that stuff back over to Trump. And so as the prosecution is going through this material, they are then updating the court. They're saying, hey, we've got this, we've got that. Judge, here's the status. And after the judge is updated and satisfied with the status, the judge will then say, great, thanks for the private update that was filed under seal. Now we can go ahead and unseal the document. Let's take a look at what that looks like. This two-page document, Donald Trump versus the United States of America, comes out of Judge Aileen Cannon's courtroom. Order granting the motion to unseal the notice of the status of privilege review team. Okay, this is the privilege review team's status. They have been going through the filter process where they're segmenting those documents out. It's a two-page document out of the Southern District of Florida, and this is Judge Cannon's order. She says, this cause comes before the court upon the government's motion to unseal the notice of the status privilege review team's filter process. Okay, she's just going to take that big mouthful and shove it into this word, the motion. The government has come forward. They are saying, Judge, we have provided you an update. Now we can unseal it. Because remember, the presumption is that we want this stuff to be public so that we can all participate in the process of the law, right? We want sort of access. The presumption of access exists. The court, says Judge, has reviewed the motion, which seeks only to unseal the notice of status of the filter process, okay? Not the attachments to that notice. See how clear this is? This means the government's motion is saying, Judge, I only want you to unseal only, the word only, the status, the notice of the status, not the attachments to that notice. Very clear, very clear. The motion is hereby granted. Okay. Now we've got some documents that we can see and some documents that we cannot see. Put a pin in that. We're coming back. For purposes of protecting claims of attorney-client privilege, however, and in accordance with the defendant's motion, exhibits A and B to the notice shall remain sealed pending further court order. Shall remain sealed, exhibits A and B. All right. So we're following along and we can see it is now ordered and Judge Cannon comes out and says the defendant's motion is granted, not a big motion, just unsealing, no problem. The clerk of the court is instructed to unseal, here it is again, only the notice of status of privilege review team's filter process. Okay, that's it. Exhibits A and B shall remain sealed until further order. Clear, absolutely clear as day. Don't even have any questions about this. If the clerk of the court comes back to the judge and says, Judge, I'm not sure, should I unseal exhibits A? No, you're fired. Get out of here. It's clear. Remain sealed. All right. Done and ordered in chambers the 3rd day of October, signed by Judge Aileen Cannon. All right. Very easy. Now, Rob, why are you spending so much time on all of these documents? Well, because something very, very interesting happened when it all hit the court docket. If we go over to Bloomberg, and let me make sure I'm logged in here. I always forget to do this. I pull up all the PDFs and everything, and I'm just not logged into to Bloomberg. But we have an account here, my friends, and we're logging in as we speak. And it's going to be here before you know it, and it's going to be worth it. Here it is. Let's do a refresh on this page. Boom. From Bloomberg, they write that Mar-a-Lago documents are now out. And we are going to take a look at this document, but something interesting happened. Now, the thousands of documents that came out are going to be documents that we'll look through. The court document is released in newly disclosed logs that came out from federal investigators. But what's interesting here is the detailed list of these seized materials were attached to a recently unsealed August 30th report from the Justice Department. And if you recall, we just read this. A judge had ordered the logs to stay under seal, but they appeared to be inadvertently posted to the public docket. Oh my gosh. She writes, they're no longer publicly visible. Uh-oh. A judge had ordered those logs pretty clearly. Shall remain under seal, only publish these things, don't do this, don't do that. Judge Cannon said it. But they appeared to be inadvertently posted to the public court docket. Ugh! Darn it! They're no longer publicly visible. The logs were created by a privilege review team that divided the potentially privileged material into two categories. The first set of 137 pages, mostly government records, but one document is entitled The President's Calls. And so let's get into all of that. This is the actual notice. Unsealed, a previously sealed document. 10 pages. This was ordered unsealed by Judge Aileen Cannon, but a little bit more got revealed. As we can see, this was filed back on August 30th, coming from the government. It's the notice of the status of privilege filter process and the production of the itemized list within their custody. The filter team has an update for the court, and they've got a more detailed itemized list. Now, the judge only said part of this can become public. But here's the update that the Department of Justice sent into the court back in August. And they're continuing to submit this on a rolling basis. This is something that they have sort of committed to doing to the court as we're rummaging through all of Trump's materials. We'll continue to provide you with updates. So back in August, one of the updates looked like this. They say, okay, Judge, here's the notice of our update. On August 27th, the court ordered the U.S. to file under seal, which was done, a more detailed receipt of the property specifying all the property that was seized at Trump's residence. Because remember, they just gave us those big lists. It says Box 31, government documents, 2,000 government documents, 25 news clippings. That's it. And then they wanted Trump to be able to vet and verify that those were corroborated. And the judge said, no, you're going to have to give us a little bit more details than that there. The court, right, the government, the court further ordered the U.S. to provide, quote, a particularized notice indicating the status of the United States review of the property and updates from the filter and the privilege review team. And they say here, the United States, through the undersigned attorneys, is giving you your notice, Judge. I hope you're happy with it. They say, as described below, the privilege team followed the specific search procedures and the filter protocols when they were at the Mar-a-Lago residence. And during their review of the process, they're saying we set rules in place and we followed all of them. As a result of that process, the privilege review team, the people who are identifying those documents, they identified 64 sets of materials consisting of approximately 520 pages, warranting further consideration. A lot of privileged stuff that could be potentially privileged, maybe yes or no. The privilege review team separated those materials into two groups, identified in the attachments A and attachment B, which we're not supposed to see. The judge said, don't publish those. As of the filing of this notice, the privilege review team has completed its review of the materials, currently within its custody and control, and it awaits further direction from the court. As part of this notice, the privilege review team outlines a potential course of action for resolving these issues, specifically about the potentially privileged documents. So the government is saying we've got these two lists. Take a look at Exhibit A, take a look at Exhibit B. We've got one set of documents in A, one set of documents in B. Judge, we don't really know what to do about this privilege, and we have a proposal for you. The filter process during the execution of the search warrant was followed, and here's how they say they did that. In seeking the warrant to go raid Trump's house, the U.S. said that it's going to follow certain steps and that the case team materials are going to segregate potentially attorney-client materials and certain stuff that's protected out, right? We're going to filter the bad stuff that they're not supposed to see out. Before the search, the case team provided the review team with a list of 35 lawyers who were on Trump's team. People like Evan Corcoran, his firm, Silverman Thompson, Slukin, and White. They said, hey, FBI agents, as you're rummaging through Melania's closet, if you see anything that says Silverman on it, you got to let us know. Okay, put that in the privilege box. The case team instructed the privilege team, so it's like the FBI, investigative team and then the filter team. They instructed each other how to review the search. The case team, directed the privilege team to mark documents reflecting communications that might be privileged, and then directed them to send them over and segregate them. Okay, so if you come across privileged materials that say, Silverman or Evan Corcoran on them, mark them, set them aside. If potentially privileged materials were commingled in a container, like in a box, because remember, when they took Trump's materials out of his residence, the judge gave them permission to take anything that was even remotely connected. If they walked in there and they saw confidential document, oh, that's in a box? Well, guess what? You get that box, plus the box to the left, the box to the right, to the top, and to the bottom. You get it all. Because the warrant was so broad. So they're telling the court, they're saying, look, this is how we handled this, Judge. If we saw that there was a box that had two sets of documents in there, commingled materials, some that had privilege and some that didn't have privilege, the privilege review team agents, they were instructed to clearly mark the entire container as potentially privileged for further review, right? Don't go rummaging through that. If you think that there might be, like there's a box of Time Magazine materials and a letter from Evan Corcoran, don't separate the two out. The Time Magazine article might be related to what Evan Corcoran's talking about. The whole thing might be privileged. You can't see that. Give that over to the filter team. Let them take a look. It says that they were instructed to take photographs by the evidence team that could potentially capture the privileged materials, and therefore the privilege team should review the SD cards containing the photographs before releasing them back to the case team. All right, so now you've got photos and SD cards, and oh my gosh. If questions arose about a particular item during the search, the privilege review agents were instructed to contact their lawyers. All right. Do you think any of this is actually being followed? Are you joking me? Okay, they might say that they are, right? You know how these things go. They're just, contact the lawyer and all. No, they're just put it in the box, move the boxes around. It's Trump's crap. Pursuant to the filter protocol and the search procedure set forth in the affidavit, the privilege review team agents were responsible for searching the 45 office and, quote, conducting a review of the seized materials from Trump's office to identify and segregate documents containing potentially attorney-client privilege materials. Additionally, and this comes from an affidavit from one of the agents, additionally, the privilege review team were to be, quote, able to assist if there was any potentially privileged materials. At the time of the search, the case team elected to have the privilege team conduct an initial search of the storage room, as well as the 45 office as described in the affidavit. So the filter team goes in first. They do a sweep. They rummage around. They sort of do a glance. They sort of shuffle some papers around. Any privileged documents in here? No, this looks clear. All right. So let the other FBI agents come rummage in here, and they all just come rummaging in there. And it's described, they say, to identify, separate the filter the materials out before the main team comes in. During the search, the privilege team agents took a broad view of potentially privileged information to include any documents or even referencing an attorney, regardless of who the attorney represented. The team also treated any legal document as potentially privileged. The materials were seized, and anything potentially privileged was done without regard to any communication, the confidentiality or the classification of the communication. They say that by the conclusion of the search at Trump's residence, the privilege team had marked and sealed 6 boxes of evidence as potentially privileged. It's kind of a lot of boxes because what did they leave with? 15? One box containing the entire contents of a single drawer in the 45 office, meaning I was joking about this, but they did it. They did it. I was saying that they went in there and they just took out a whole desk drawer. You know those desk drawers that sort of come out underneath your keyboard, and if you like bump it with your knee, the whole drawer falls out from underneath the desk. You ever have that happen? Yeah. So, they just ripped it out of Trump's desk. I'm sure his is a little bit better built than the ones that I've used. But they take the whole drawer and they just flip it over and dump it in a box. They say that non-privileged responsive material had been located in 5 boxes from the storage room, containing potentially privileged documents commingled as well with non-privileged and responsive materials. The privilege team agents in Florida maintained sole custody and continuous control of the 6 boxes that did contain the privileged materials that were then transferred over to the FBI in Washington. Now they say, right, that's how they got the documents. The judge, this is what we did. This is how we did it. And so we can't see what Trump's objections are, what his team is objecting to on any of this, or what other information they know, or if they have been filing or whatever. But it's leading us to the point where they hand the boxes off. It's coming out of Trump's residence, and now it's being transferred back over to Washington. At Washington, the 6 sealed boxes that may have had the privileged materials are now sent to a secure room, and that case team didn't have access to the room. They say it's totally separate. It's like separate locker rooms. They're not allowed in there. An additional 7th box was transferred to the custody and control of the privilege team after a case team agent observed a document with Morgan Lewis letterhead commingled with newspapers. Uh-oh. What does that mean? Yeah, the privilege review filter team, it looks like they may have missed something. An additional 7th box came in after the fact. Uh-oh. Consistent with the filter protocol set forth in the affidavit, the case team stopped its review of that entire box and provided it to the privilege review team agents to conduct a review to identify and segregate the potentially privileged materials. Yeah, so it's like, they got their hand caught in the cookie jar. We're not supposed to be looking at these. We better give those back over to the case team. Did you see anything when you were looking through there? No. It was like literally it was the first paper right on top. We saw Morgan Lewis and we just transferred it over. That's all we've got. So you can trust us. We didn't see anything. By August 11th, the privilege team agents had completed their review of the 7 containers of evidence containing those materials, the 5 boxes that came out of the storage room, the 1 box containing the contents of the office desk, and the 7th box the case team provided to the privilege team for the review after the search in Washington. During this review, and consistent with paragraph of the affidavit, the filter team reviewed each box's contents and separated any privileged documents and then conveyed the non-privileged stuff back over to the case team. So the filter says, we're going to keep this stuff. Anything else goes right back to you guys. They maintain custody and control throughout the entirety of the review. They say undersigned counsel completed our review of the materials on August 23rd, meaning the lawyers who submitted this. They say we were also involved, and after the filter team did their review, we did our review. And now, Judge, that's why we're providing you with notice. As part of that review, the filter team created a complete inventory of the potentially privileged documents and divided those materials into 2 groups detailed further down below. And remember, Exhibits A and B were not supposed to be attached, only for the court, but the court inadvertently published them, according to Bloomberg. Although most of the materials do not appear to even be potentially privileged, consistent with the procedure set forth in the affidavit, we've not released any of these materials to the case team. So they're saying some of it might not even be close, but if it's close, then we're going to keep it. On August 25th, they write, an attorney over on the FBI's case team provided the review team with a 39-page set of materials that appears to reflect Trump's phone calls. Uh-oh. The majority of the pages are titled The President's Calls, and they include the presidential seal. Specifically, the document contains handwritten names, numbers, and notes that primarily appear to be messages, as well as several pages of miscellaneous notes. This document is identified as item 21. After the case team at the FBI observed notes next to names, the attorney stopped reviewing the set of materials and asked the privilege review team attorneys to take a look. After the FBI is rummaging through what might be Donald Trump's notes, which would be covered if these are conversations that involve legal counsel, maybe with attorneys, or just executive privilege. The privilege review team says, uh-oh, got to give this over to those guys. The case team says, got to give this over to the privilege team. The privilege team attorneys reviewed the set of materials and added it to another potential group of privileged materials in Exhibit A. They say that this set of materials was not previously identified as potentially privileged by the privilege review team agents. So they're making mistake after mistake after mistake. This is why we had a special master, because they're just continually coming across these privileged documents. The privilege review team attorneys directed the privilege review team agents to once again segregate those materials and maintain custody and control. As of the date of this pleading, government prosecutors tell the court that no materials have been identified by the privilege review team have been given over to the case team. The problematic stuff is sticking with the case team. With the privilege team, not going back over to the investigation. They say, it is our understanding that the case team has finished a preliminary review of the documents, and the case team has not referred any other stuff over to us. In other words, this is saying we're not expecting any more privileged materials to come out. Case team's done. They've already rummaged through everything. To the extent that anything more pops up, we're going to update the court. Now, that's where we're at. And so they're going to give us these two big sets of documents that we will take a look at. But they're also proposing what to do next. They tell us, they say, Judge, look, as described above, the privilege team has completed its review and we're awaiting further direction from the court. They say that we have a potential course of action that we think might be appropriate. Attorneys on the team, they determined that 21 sets of materials that are identified in Exhibit A are primarily what they say are government records, public documents, communications to third parties. So we're going to look at two inventories in a minute, A and B, Exhibit A and Exhibit B. And one of them is going to have government records, public documents, and third-party conversations. They say, as such, virtually none of those materials appear to be privileged or attorney work product doctrine. They say that there are, however, Judge, there are two closer calls here, which involve communications to a White House government email account implicating a waiver. In other words, they're sort of waiving the privileges, and a brief message from a possible attorney that does not appear on its face to be related to legal advice. Right, so you just can't have like a conversation about committing a crime with a lawyer and just say, "Oh, it's legal advice." You know, we can't. It's got to be legitimate. And they're also saying we've got these two issues that might pop up. One of them is not really attorney-client privilege because this brief message to this person, we don't know who this is. They say a possible attorney, and you see here Rudy. I wonder who that could be. You know, in quotes, a brief message from an attorney Rudy doesn't appear to be related to legal advice, but we're not sure. Now, before disclosing the materials that were identified in Exhibit A back over to the case team, so from filter to the case, and consistent with the procedures, they say the privilege review team is prepared to disclose copies of the materials that are Bates stamped, meaning documented and sort of filed into evidence, so that Trump and his lawyers may review the materials and, if appropriate, assert their privileges. If any documents are identified that would we could attempt to resolve these if we have a disagreement. If unable to reach an agreement, we'll try to issue this under seal to the court. They continue. As to the documents described in the other list, Exhibit B, the privilege review team proposes to return the originals and provide copies to Trump. Many of these materials do not appear to be privileged, although one does appear to be. They talk about footnote 11. Item number 33 appears to be privileged. They say that they are all either legal in nature or otherwise potentially sensitive, and they do not appear by themselves to be governmental or presidential records. They say, in light of this pending litigation related to the search of the premises, the privilege team proposes to maintain and continue to segregate from the case team a control copy of Exhibit B. In sum, they write in conclusion, the privilege team has completed its review of the materials identified as potentially privileged. The case team has searched all of the materials and they've segregated them out. And they say, Judge, we are now waiting further direction from the court on how to proceed with the documents identified in Exhibits A and B. Signed by Anthony LaCosta, Managing Assistant United States Attorney out of Palm Beach. Now, this is what the court was supposed to publish, and it was supposed to end there, as Judge Aileen Cannon told us in her order. She said very clearly, filter review team, only the notice should be released, not Exhibits A and not Exhibits B. Well, unfortunately, the court did, in fact, publish those. Exhibit A, filed under seal and ex parte. This is the privilege review team documents, and you can see the types of materials that are in here. Draft of an immigration initiative from 2019. A congressional clemency request for somebody named RN. A clemency request also for somebody named RN. Emails between a baseball coach at the Air Force Academy and the White House. An unsigned letter from a law firm to Robert Mueller. Executive actions on illegal immigration draft. We have printed email between the White House and National Security Council about John Walker Lynn. Letter to the president about Ted Sewell. Publicly filed letter about Rod Blagojevich. Commutation of his sentence. We've got 2 internal pardon packages. Who could these be for? IR and JC and MB. Wonder who those could be. They've got printed emails from Charles Harder to New York. Document titled Meeting Request with the President. Molly's questions for POTUS. A printed email from Kurt Hilbert over to Fulton County lawsuit about federal complaints and verifications. Another printed email, White House account, sharing 10 files about a federal lawsuit. A red folder marked NARA letters and other copies. Contents of a manila folder, NARA letters. 35 pages, each titled, oh, there it is, The President's Calls with the President's Seal. Handwritten names, numbers, and notes, and a message from Rudy. 4 blank pages with miscellaneous handwritten notes, all from the former president. Now, if you'll notice, we don't see anything in here that talks about top secret nuclear codes. We don't see anything about, let's say, solicitation of hacked materials or hacking efforts to the Russian, FSB or something, whatever it is they claim that Trump was doing. I don't see much of that here, right? Most of this seems like a bunch of useless stuff. Documents about approval, post-it notes for POTUS review, right? It's all just standard business stuff. Former calls, that's it. All of that now is in the government's possession. Every time that you hear somebody on MSNBC screaming from the hilltops about what a traumatic, catastrophic seizure this was, this is what they're talking about. An email about a federal lawsuit, an email regarding verifications, printed email from a New York Times from Charles Harder, clemency requests. It's standard business stuff. I didn't see anything in here about the North Koreans. Maybe those are in the classified documents. We have Exhibit B. That's also here. What do we have? A medical letter from Dr. Harold Bornstein. Don't know what that's about. That was dated on 9/13/2016. Now in possession of the FBI. A medical letter, Trump's private well, I don't know what it is. Summons and complaint with exhibits for Trump versus Northland. Copies of Morgan Lewis regarding taxes. Pat Cipollone business card. And they even note what was written on the back of it. Post-it note. Signed letter from Trump. Letter from Morgan Lewis about taxes. All of this. The FBI is rummaging through it. Could you imagine if this was your house? Could you imagine if this was your file cabinet? I've got a file cabinet right here. Listen. Here it is. You hear that? What if they just came out here and just took that drawer and just dumped it all in there? And they just said, oh, well, we're the FBI. We just get to do whatever the heck we want to do. And guess what? It's ours now. And they just rummage through it all. All your letters, all of your documents, all your, it's like emails and stuff. Envelopes containing explanation of benefits. Yellow folder marked the restricted covenant agreement signed by TMG. Red folder about Bronx's mediation program, agreement to mediate, signed by Trump. Invoices for legal fees. Manila folders. Trump Media Group resolutions, minute entries. Envelopes containing signed powers of attorney. New York documents from IRS. More tax records. This is it. Invoices for Alina Abba's legal fees. Filed summons to marry Trump. Folder marked Harder containing signed settlement agreement. And isn't it interesting that this document gets leaked? Weird how it gets published. So that everybody gets to just sort of look through all this stuff like we're doing here. And, the judge said multiple times, don't publish this. Don't publish it, but it's out. I don't know if it was a mistake on the clerk of the court or what happened, but the document is now publicly available. And I'm sort of glad it is because there's not much in here. Folder containing non-disclosure agreements, contracts agreements regarding Save America, and letters from Charles Harder regarding AJ allegations. Legal here. Non-disclosure agreements. Meadows Collar terms of representation and fee agreement. It's all business stuff. Consent order, substitution of counsel in Trump's lawsuit. All legal documents. All seized by the FBI. This is more than just somebody taking documents out of your house, right? This is now interfering with every one of these cases. It's interfering with every single, activity that Trump needs to engage in to resolve these issues. But the FBI, they're now rummaging through it. These two exhibits put on the public docket and now publicly available in the once sealed, now unsealed notice provided to Judge Cannon. So very strange to see stuff like that happen when the judge is very specific about it. I'll be curious to see if the court clerk has any clarification on why that happened or if the judge does anything about that. But we'll of course, wait and see. Government prosecutors want Trump's appeal accelerated, and they are going to get their wish. The 11th Circuit Court of Appeals came down in Donald Trump versus the United States. Remember, the United States filed the appeal with the 11th Circuit, and they were asking for the appeal process to be accelerated, to hurry this process up, calling it expediting the appeal. They filed a motion to expedite the appeal. We read through both arguments. The government said, Judge, we've got a lot of importance behind this investigation. The American public demand answers, and you have to help us get them. Trump's lawyers said, wait a minute, we don't need to accelerate all this. The government got tons of time to file their appeal over 30 days. We should get the same standard 30 days. The rules say we're entitled to it. And it went up to the 11th Circuit. The court ruled, they say, the motion is granted. Government prosecutors win. The court directs the clerk of the court to expedite the appeals for merits disposition purposes, meaning we're going to go all the way up on this thing. Having consulted with the chief judge, the appeal will be assigned to a special merits panel from the classified appeals log randomly selected by the clerk. And most people on law Twitter don't really know what this is going to look like when it hits. The panel will then decide how to hear the oral argument. So we don't really know what that's going to look like yet. A classified appeals log randomly selected. Okay, the next question is, who's on the classified appeals log and who are these people? The panel will then decide how to hear the oral argument. But in the meantime, they tell us the court sets the following expedited briefing schedule, meaning this thing is going faster, with no extensions allowed. Don't even ask. The appellant's initial brief, meaning the government's brief, due on or before October 14th. Trump responds by November 10th. This will be now after the midterms. And then the government replies on November 17th. And as we talked about yesterday, this case is also being appealed up at the Supreme Court level. Judge Clarence Thomas ordered the government to respond to that next week. And of course, we will continue to follow that as well. As the special master saga continues, the search warrant that raided Mar-a-Lago, authorized by Judge Reinhardt, we're looking back to ask ourselves, what happened at the Mar-a-Lago residence? This is Donald Trump explaining there was plenty of security there in Florida, that the FBI is making much ado about nothing, that the Secret Service agents who were protecting the storage room where all of these documents were found were perfectly capable of protecting America's vital national security interests. And Trump tells a little story about the clavicle heard round the world.
George W. Bush transported millions of documents from the White House to an unguarded warehouse in Texas. The records of George H.W. Bush administration were moved to a bowling alley that was combined with a Chinese restaurant.
What?
And remember, Mar-a-Lago is not only walled off, very secure.
Yeah.
And totally safe.
He was there for 4 years.
It's also guarded by dozens of very strong and powerful U.S. Secret Service agents. Although, if you listen to this one very sick individual, in order to get the Secret Service to take me to the Capitol, I grabbed one around the neck.
By the clavicle.
And, you know, I almost didn't want to dispute it because a lot of people said, I never knew you were that physically tough.
Yeah.
This guy was a tough guy that I supposedly grabbed. If I grabbed him around the neck, I think I would have been in serious trouble. I would have needed Jorge to bail me out.
That was when he almost grabbed the clavicle of that Secret Service agent right after January 6th, almost saying, take me back to the White House, before he hopped into Marine One, the helicopter, and picked up the podium guy and then hightailed it over to Russia before they rained from Putin's lair or something.
No, they make up things, and when they find out it's a phony story, they don't want to put it down that it was a totally make. Can you imagine that? That was a step too far. You know, sometimes they go too far and people say, oh, that couldn't have happened. That could not have happened. That didn't happen. And of course,
it's all made up. It's all political hit jobs, mostly garbage meant to try to smear the former president. And of course, these cases are going to continue to percolate, and we will continue to follow. Thank you for liking. Thank you for subscribing and following along on the channel. As we do, going to be a lot more Trump stuff to get into, and it's going to continue to heat up.